Hello, once again. We are taking a look at a Tenpai deck list. This is the list that I used to get to the master rank, so I figured I'd show it off and kind of talk a little bit about the theory. Obviously, this is a meta threat on Master Duel right now. Some people take issue with this deck. I can understand why, but yeah, I figured I'll show off my list and see what we can get into, and yeah, just kind of talk a little bit about how I use the deck and some of the theory behind it. So in terms of the engine itself, right, we do have some hits to Tenpai that we can talk about, but I think we'll start with the hand trap lineup because that, in my opinion, is kind of what makes or breaks this deck. I think that you do play some board breakers and you do play hand traps in this deck, but I mean, especially with the hits, you need to find a way to draw into your engine. And that's really where these Mulch Armies come in. So I'm going to start with these 6 cards. We have triple Perulia and triple Fulos. And I mean, there's not really much to say as to why you're playing these, right? You need these as draw power. And both of them absolutely come up. Your opponent's deck may be able to play around one, but odds are they cannot play around both. And so at the very least, Perulia is going to be an upstart goblin drawing you at least one card. And Fulos is going to, immediately stymie their plays if they want to do anything related to the extra deck or something from the deck. So I really do think that you have to max out on these. And then as you're drawing into cards, right, you do want to hit like hand traps that are actually going to do something even if you draw multiples. And so I think the best hand trap that you're drawing into, I mean, I don't know about best in terms of power, but that specific idea of drawing into a non-once per turn hand trap, it really takes the shape with Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence. Both do the same thing. Effect Veiler obviously will play into talents a little bit more, but these are both fantastic because if you control no cards, you can activate Impermanence, and you can always use Effect Veiler on your opponent's main phase. And you can even have multiple too. So, unlike Imperm, where if you have one, you activate it on the field, and then your opponent does something, you can't then just chain the other one, right? Because you would control a card at that point while it's face up. But with Effect Veiler, that is not the case. So if your opponent happens to, let's say Called by the Grave or interact with your Effect Veiler to try to negate it, you can just chain the other one and just drop it on them. So I'm a big fan of maxing out on these particular hand traps because, that's what you can draw into and continue to use multiple copies. So those are both fantastic from a hand trap perspective. Maxi, Ash Blossom, nothing to say there. And then some kind of hand traps to round it out. Magnamut is kind of the honorary Tenpai card, right? This is something that you can use very well with Effect Veiler, I would say, to kind of search your Tenpai engine. You're activating Magnamut, and during end phase, you can go ahead and do your sick Genroku play to, you search Genroku with the Magnamut, use Genroku's effect, and boom, you're setting up your Tenpai board on your opponent's end phase, which is terrific. Then, in terms of the last hand trap we're running here, that's going to be Nib. Let's punish the people who are on this. Let's take the Mulch Army Maxi challenge. That's what Nib is for. I don't want to see multiple copies of this. I think seeing a few too many would be unfortunate, but you're going to be drawing into this most likely if your opponent is deciding to take one of those challenges where you're drawing a bunch of cards as they continue to pop off. So I like Nib as a deterrent because you're tributing 5. Or, when they normal or special 5, you're tributing the whole board. So I think that that's really terrific as a hand trap that you can specifically attempt to draw into with your just ridiculous draw power of essentially 6 Maxis. So outside of the hand trap lineup, I think we can just briefly touch on the Tenpai engine here. So we're obviously on the triple Pydra. This is your main normal summon. Still the one Fadra. You can bring it back with, obviously you have your Bident to bring it back. There is the Promethean Princess to line to bring it back. And so I still don't think that even with these Tenpai hits, you should be increasing the Fadra count. At least I haven't seen a good enough argument for that. And so for that very reason, we also haven't increased Genroku as well. We're keeping this at 2 with the 1 Dora Dora because these are all kind of doing the same thing of, you can normal summon, it's not great. You definitely want 2. And so this ratio really hasn't changed. The one Chandra definitely hurts. Obviously, this is what many would say is the strongest Tenpai monster card. That's not in the extra deck, of course. And so, you know, you're going to need to get a little bit more creative with how you're using your Chandra. You don't want to just shotgun this when, let's say, your opponent goes first. You could, but, you know, if this thing gets banished from your graveyard, you're going to be having a really bad time. So ideally, Chandra is there for when you're ready to go for game, and then you commit to it. But yeah, due to the limits on the Master Duel Forbidden list, you do have to be a little bit more judicious with how you're activating Chandra. So the rest of the engine really comes down to your single field spell, right? This is fantastic, easily the strongest, Tenpai spell you've got in your deck, being able to protect your dragons, search for them, and then, you know, when it gets popped, you get to double your attack. All of those are terrific. And then we are obviously on the triple Kaimen. Thank God this is still at 3. If it wasn't, I don't think you could be playing pure Tenpai as a deck anymore, because you just wouldn't have as many ways of getting to engine. And so I think that you can definitely splash Tenpai, even today on Master Duel. You can splash it in other engines and probably try to find some success. But yeah, just the fact that Kaimen is at 3 is absolutely fantastic. You know, this is grabbing your dragons, and then during the battle phase, it's summoning. There's the classic play where you grab one fire dragon and summon the other. Usually, if that's the case, you're grabbing your Genroku and then maybe summoning the Fadra from your hand, right? So there are some sweet plays you can obviously do with the Kaimen. So that kind of rounds out our Tenpai engine. Now let's go ahead and get into the board breakers. I do think you need to play a mix of both, because when you do end up going second, your opponent's going to have a fully established board, especially if you didn't happen to draw into, you know, one of your 9 maxis. And so because of that, you do need some way to like truly break their board. And so the Duster seems mandatory to me. You know, there's so much back row, even in decks that don't have a ton of back row. Just cleaning up their imperms is really important, because, you know, your Tenpais get stopped and things get much, much harder, especially with these new limits, to continue to push through multiple monster effect negations. So I think that's what the Duster and the Double Storms are for. Mostly back row hate, although if your opponent's foolish enough to put things in face-up attack, you can obviously, you know, clean up the board that way too. And then we are on double talent. I go back and forth between 2 and 3. The problem is this is a hard once per turn. You can only use it once. And so because of that, if I see multiple, yes, if the activation gets negated, you can obviously throw down the second or the third copy, you know, as you will. But I don't want to necessarily brick on this. And there are many other breakers that I want to play that I don't think it necessarily, you know, justifies the 3 copies in the main deck. And that's really because we're on the triple droplet. There are many unbreakable boards that people are making in Master Duel, and sometimes the only way to truly break them is with droplet, where you pitch a monster so they can't respond with that monster effect that they're trying to activate. So I think having triple droplet is just correct right now, especially because you're not running shifter anymore, right? We can't afford to banish our Chandra, and so because of that, I think having the triple droplet really just makes sense. This is probably the best board breaker you have for truly contesting. And then, of course, you're using droplet as a response to your opponent trying to, let's say, negate maybe your Pydra effect or your Fadra effect to essentially dodge, because you can use the droplet to send from the field. So I think that that's really kind of your best board breaker on its own. But that kind of rounds out your main deck here. So in terms of the extra deck, not much has really changed. We are playing a slightly diminished Synchro package to make space for some more links. But yeah, we're on the Black Rose. We do need to be able to clean up. It's really, really nice to be able to Black Rose with, say, your Sangen summoning, or if you happen to draw Genroku, and you'll make the Black Rose first and then use your Kaimen to kind of be your follow-up during the battle phase to go for game. So this is a great way to clean up back row. Meteor Burst, I go back and forth on this. It says your opponent can't activate monster effects during the battle phase. I think that it definitely has some utility for sure, being able to make this against the mirror match. But many times if you can make this, there are usually lines to climb into the Transcendent, which is just better. But I think that there's still a justification for playing this, because let's say you are going up against the mirror, you need to get to this before your opponent. So trying to climb into a Transcendent is going to take too long. So I think for at least right now, I'm liking the 1 Meteor Burst. Samurai Destroyer has been putting in work, especially with the tons of UL that I've been seeing. This thing also can beat the Chaos Angel as well. So the thing that's really unique about this card and certain other effects like the Kashtira Scareclaw card, right? When If this card battles your opponent's monster, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. Also, that opponent's monster's effects are negated during the battle phase only. This negates a well set up Chaos Angel. Even if they use lights and synchro monsters are unaffected by opponent's monster effects activated by the opponent. What's crazy, and obviously if you know problem solving card text, this makes sense, this does not activate. So this is an effect that just happens. And the reason you know this is because there's no semicolon or no colon. And in terms of grammar and the way that translates to Yu-Gi-Oh rulings means that there's no activated effect here. So this really gets around many troublesome towers monsters, like monsters that are hard to break on your opponent's board. And that includes most of the U-Bells, right, that can't be destroyed by battle and stuff like that. This is cleaning them up. So Samurai Destroyer is more important than ever, in my opinion, especially in the current meta. Quibel, it's good spot removal. I think that this is theoretically your line to OTK. If your opponent shifters you, you pop your own Sangen summoning, and then boom, you've doubled your attack of the Quibel. So I think it's worth playing. Gotta play 2 Biden. This just comes up now more than ever, right? You need to be bringing back your Chandra and your Fajra from the graveyard to continue your plays. So I really do think you need 2. Trident, dear God, I was looking at the statistics for this while I was playing some duels, and I think this is the #1 finisher on Master Duel right now. This guy is on average doing over 3,000 because, right, you're obviously attacking multiple times, and there's ways to double its attack, right? So this thing is just a house. You're still absolutely on the Trident. I love Baron. I don't think I'm going to be cutting this anytime soon because it's legal on Master Duel, but 2, there are many ways where you can make this with, let's say, your Genroku that increases its level to make it a level 4 tuner. Pair that with your Magnamut, great. Most lines you're climbing into Baron is through the Magnamut because you have your 6 and then you need a level 4, which could either be Chandra or the Genroku. So I really like Baron in this deck. It pops, it negates, it does a lot on its own. And then, of course, we've got the Sangenpai Transcendent Dragion. There's nothing to really say about this card. It's exactly what you want to be making during game. The fact that it forces your opponent's monsters to attack. You're making this in the mirror before your opponent to make them, kill all their monsters. It switches them all to attack. So this is a really, really solid card. I will say, in the entirety of my experience playing Tenpai this format, I have never once resolved this summon back from the graveyard effect to destroy a card on the field, but it is there. Typhon. This is one that I do go back and forth a little bit, but I think that it's a really solid option, especially with this slightly watered down Tenpai list because of the Forbidden Unlimited list. This is a way where, let's say you do your normal summon, right? You normal summon Pydra going into opponent's big board, and it gets stopped, right? You're getting negated. You didn't draw your board breakers. Your hand traps weren't enough to cut it. This card can sometimes win you games you're not supposed to. And that's because you just slap this guy, on top of whatever you have that is the biggest attack after your opponent summoned 2 or more from the extra deck. It lets you have your floodgate going for the 3,000 or more attack monsters. You can return a monster to the hand. This is your answer to Dragoon if people are playing that. So I actually really like Typhon right now. I think that this could be considered a flex spot, but I think it's put in more work than I would like to admit. So I think for now, we're going to go ahead and keep it in the deck. And then in terms of our links, we do have the Striker to climb into the SP. I use SP a lot, actually, because if you're going into any sort of grind game, you're going to want to have access to this card to be that double removal, right? Banish on Link Summon if you used an extra deck monster, and then the banish 2 face-up monsters as well. Super, super relevant. So for now, I do actually think the Striker and SP are very solid choices. Can't quite say they're mandatory. If you want to talk mandatory, though, Hieratic Seal and Hita are absolutely mandatory. So your Hieratic Seal is, that's what you're making on your turn 1. And then Hita is your way into Engine, and many people are aware of this, but this is your way into Engine if you don't have anything else. Where, let's say you've got your Nib and an Ash on the follow-up, right? You normal summon Ash, make your Hita, go to the battle phase. Now, if your opponent is on Tenpais, they're in for a very rough time with this Hita. But most importantly, this can be something that you climb into with your Ash Blossom and go ahead and get the rest of your engine going too. You could also have your Pydra followed up with, some special summon monster like the Magnamut. Go into Hita, search, crash this thing in basically. and then search out your Genroku, search, and then that's basically going to be, getting the whole play going here, because this is added to your hand from a search, summon, fantastic. And then the last card to talk about in the extra deck is the Promethean Princess. I had this card cut for a while, but I've actually changed my mind, and I do think that you have to play this because there are some lines where you have to use this to get back into your Chandra or Fadra, because we're only playing one of each, and we can't afford to play multiple copies in the main deck. We got rid of a Biden there, but yeah, because of that, I think that we really do have to consider playing this card, because it can be an interruption in the grind game as well, right? This thing is getting summoned out on your opponent's turn sometimes, popping one of their cards, and then you're continuing to grab back your Tenpais from the grave. So I think that this is maybe a bit more of a flex spot. Same with the Meteor Burst. I think those are two, maybe even the Kui Belt as well, where you might want to consider Black Rose if you're having maybe a little more back row hate in your main deck. But yeah, this is a deck that has been working very, very well for me. And I think that the Mulch Army that seems to be overperforming for me is Perulia. There are so many times where if I draw this instead of Maxi, I'm chilling. I'm like, cool. I want my opponent to Ash Blossom this, or I'm going to steal some free draws from the opponent for sure, because while many times it can be just an upstart, in my opinion, and especially in the Diamond and Master ranks that I've been doing as of late, I am using this card to the maximum value, where people are just dropping Cached Heroes from their hand, they're dropping all sorts of Yubels, right? And so because of that, I really like Perulia, and I think that you have to play triple copies of each. And the clause that I think really makes Mulch Armies broken is the fact that you can activate another one the turn you activate their effect, so you can double Fulos, double Perulia, or mix and match. Not to mention you can still drop Maxi as well. So I think all that said, I have been very happy with this list. I do think that eventually this engine will need to get hit. They'll probably need to address this Kaiman things to eliminate the main, like the pure Tenpais, as it were. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.